President Donald Trump just made perhaps his biggest, boldest, and most shocking declaration about the war in Ukraine so far. It's a statement that quite literally changes everything, and one that should inspire Ukraine and send a massive wave of worry all the way to the desk of Russia's President, Vladimir Putin, himself. It also shows just how strongly Trump's viewpoint on the Russia-Ukraine war has shifted in recent times. Prior to entering office, the 47th president famously pledged to use his powers of negotiation and influence to bring the war to an end. Unfortunately, despite multiple efforts and in-person meetings with the leaders of both nations, Putin from Russia and Volodymyr Zelensky from Ukraine, Trump has so far been unable to stop the conflict. He has, however, tried numerous tactics to bring about some sort of ceasefire or peace agreement, pressuring and encouraging both sides in different ways to negotiate and compromise. Yet, while some of his opinions and positions have changed with time, Trump has generally maintained the belief that Ukraine would need to accept giving up some of its territory in any possible peace deal with Russia. He has repeatedly spoken about the ideas of land concessions or territorial swaps, for example, suggesting that Ukraine may have to concede any ambitions of regaining regions like Crimea or Donetsk. However, in a recent post on his social media platform, Truth Social, Trump has said something completely different, suggesting that Ukraine could and perhaps even should continue the fight until it reclaims all of its lost land. The president's post began, after getting to know and fully understand the Ukraine/Russia military and economic situation, and after seeing the economic trouble it is causing Russia, I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. With time, patience, and the financial support of Europe, and in particular NATO, the original borders from where this war started is very much an option. Why not? This is a gigantic statement. Just back in August, around the time of his meeting with Putin in Alaska, Trump was still speaking about land swapping between the two sides. Now, however, his stance appears clear and firm. Ukraine is in a position, backed by its European and NATO allies, to reclaim every single sliver of lost land from the Russian occupiers, restoring its entire territory and emerging victorious from the conflict. But Trump's statement didn't end there. After bigging up Ukraine's prospects, the president then went on to directly denigrate Russia. Russia has been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years, a war that should have taken a real military power less than a week to win. This is not distinguishing Russia. In fact, it is very much making them look like a paper tiger. And the people living in Moscow, and all of the great cities, towns, and districts all throughout Russia, find out what is really going on with this war. The fact that it's almost impossible for them to get gasoline through the long lines that are being formed, and all of the other things that are taking place in their war economy, where most of their money is being spent on fighting Ukraine, which has great spirit, and only getting better. Ukraine would be able to take back their country in its original form and, who knows, maybe even go further than that. Putin and Russia are in big economic trouble, and this is the time for Ukraine to act. In any event, I wish both countries well. We will continue to supply weapons to NATO for NATO to do what they want with them. Good luck to all. There's so much to take from this lengthy and meaningful statement. The first and most obvious point is the aforementioned fact that Trump's stance has evidently shifted in a big way. In the past, he repeatedly stated that Ukraine was the smaller and weaker power in this war, and that despite defending its territory valiantly, it couldn't realistically expect victory against a much larger opponent. Trump called on Ukraine, and especially its President Zelensky, to be willing to make concessions and sacrifice some of its territories to end the war. He stated that it was the only feasible path forward for Kyiv. Now it's almost the exact opposite. Trump is saying what so many military analysts around the world are thinking. Ukraine may have started off this war in a weak position, facing up against a force so much stronger and richer than its own. On paper it should have lost, and it should have lost quickly under the sheer weight of Russia's massive army and extraordinary amount of armor and firepower. However, as the war has progressed, the tide has turned. Ukraine has grown stronger, while Russia has grown weaker. Kyiv has not merely resisted, it has adapted, innovated, and excelled. It has mastered drone warfare, developed a domestic missile industry to rival some of the best in the world, fine-tuned its tactics to consistently outwit and outmaneuver its enemy, and proven on countless occasions that its forces are more than a match for those on the other side. Ukraine has also enjoyed enormous backing from its allies in Europe and the NATO alliance. Allies like the US, France, Germany, Poland, the Nordic nations, and the United Kingdom have all pledged and contributed massive amounts to the cause, whether that be through weapons, equipment, funds, training, humanitarian aid, or all of the above. This too has played a colossal part in essentially evening the odds between Russia and Ukraine, canceling out the huge advantage that the Kremlin has on paper in terms of manpower, money, and equipment. Russia never could have anticipated all of this. Indeed, when the invasion first began, Many Russian soldiers, citizens, and government officials expected their so-called special military operation to be over and done with in a matter of days. Some soldiers even marched into Ukraine with parade uniforms in their packs, expecting to raise the Russian flag in Kiev without facing much or any notable resistance. On the face of it, it's not hard to see why Russia was so confident in those early stages. As Trump himself says, a true major military power should not necessarily have that much trouble invading a much smaller and weaker neighbor, especially when it has the upper hand in so many areas. With better planning and strategy, Russia may have been able to win the war quite quickly. But its planning was poor and its execution even worse. Time and time again, the Kremlin's incompetence has been exposed, and Ukraine has found ways to exploit its enemies. Now, as Trump also states, Kiev's spirit is only getting stronger while Moscow's economy is weakening by the day, and that stats back this up. Along the front lines, it's Ukraine, not Russia, that is dealing serious damage and battling back to claim valuable ground. In Donetsk, for example, Russia has toiled away for months now in a desperate attempt to capture a single city, Pokrovsk. It has thrown everything it can at this place but has proven utterly unable to take it. Ukraine, meanwhile, has actually retaken 5 times more land in and around that region Russia has been able to capture. That means that even in one of the most fiercely contested stretches of front-line territory, it's Ukraine that's in the ascendancy. Kyiv is also conducting strategic drone and missile strikes on many of Russia's most important and valuable assets, including ammo depots all over the Donetsk region, plus command posts, airfields, and so on. Each strike not only weakens Russia's war effort, but as Trump notes, it also deals blow after blow to the country's economy, too. And there is no doubt at all that Russia's economy is suffering. The value of the ruble has plummeted, the country is cut off from many international banks and payment systems, its national wealth fund has decreased due to excessive military spending, and its people are spending up to twice as much now for everyday goods as they were just a few years ago. Even major financial figures within Russia who would normally toe the line and say whatever the Kremlin wants them to say have spoken out, like the economy minister, Maxim Reshetnikov, who warned during the summer that the country was on the brink of recession. That too all ties into Trump's view that Ukraine is now in the power position and could now push its advantage, push the Russians out of its occupied territories and regain its full and complete sovereignty. As the US president says quite clearly, this is the time for Ukraine to act. One of the most significant pieces of Trump's post is easily missed, however, as it's only made up of a few words, but they hold a huge amount of meaning. The president wrote, Ukraine would be able to take back their country in its original form and who knows, maybe even go further than that. That last phrase is highly suggestive and unprecedented, as Trump has not spoken previously about Ukraine going on to actually push into Russia and take land from the Kremlin itself. And there are many possible ways to read this. Trump understands the power of words and knows how to use them to put pressure on people. It may be that through this statement, the US president is attempting to undermine the authority of his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. Trump has, after all, on numerous occasions in recent times, expressed frustration with Putin. The pair have enjoyed a strong working relationship in the past, and Trump has met and spoken with Putin on many occasions, often leaving those meetings feeling hopeful and expressing optimism that the war might soon be over. But every time Russia simply says one thing and does another, talking about ending the war to Trump before launching another record-breaking drone attack on Ukraine. In Trump's own words regarding Putin, every conversation I have with him, Putin, is a good conversation. And then unfortunately a bomb is loaded up into Kyiv or someplace, and then I get very angry about it. Putin's lies and deception have clearly taken a toll on the relationship between the two leaders, and it appears that Trump has been pushed too far. Now, rather than taking Russia's side or attempting to broker a deal that works out well for Putin, the US president seems to be heading the other direction, criticizing Russia's military, drawing attention to its weakening economy, and even suggesting that Ukraine should respond with an invasion of its own. The end of Trump's post is also very telling, as he affirms that the US will continue to supply arms to NATO, with those arms then being passed onward to Ukraine to use against Russia as it sees fit. In short, the US president acknowledges openly that America will remain steadfast in its support of Ukraine, giving Russia an increasingly strong and well-supported opponent to deal with. Trump's stunning declaration came shortly after talks with President Zelensky, which were held after both leaders addressed the UN General Assembly in New York on September 23. During the assembly, Zelensky urged leaders from around the world to not lose focus on the war in Ukraine, and suggested that the UN appeared to be losing some of the influence it once had to address and end global conflicts. The organization has less influence, and too often there is a lack of real decisions on fundamental issues. This is exactly what we need to speak about today, the tools that sadly are not working now, but they will work, I'm sure. They will work if you are active, if we are active, because the main tool is in your hands. Ukraine's leader went on to suggest some ways in which the UN Security Council could back Kyiv and take action to bring about peace talks. He first proposed the creation of a joint air defense system that would counter Russia's many missile and drone strikes, which have become even more intense in recent times. Early in September, for example, Russia sent over 800 drones and more than a dozen cruise and ballistic missiles towards targets all over Ukraine, killing at least 2 people and injuring dozens more. Ukraine already has strong air defense systems in place to down the majority of drones Russia sends its way. But with those drones recently passing into other countries like Poland and Romania, the need for superior defenses not only in Ukraine but elsewhere across Europe is undoubtedly rising. Zelensky said that a new joint air defense system could effectively erase Russia's aerial attacks, and if the Kremlin can no longer call on its drones and missiles, it would have very little left to continue the war. Here is one example of how strength can stop war. If we could strengthen our skills with a joint system to shut down the skis, with a short system to shut down Russian missiles and drones, it would force Russia to stop its attack from the sky because everything could be shut down. And so, Putin would be forced to sit here or in another respectable venue and look for truth on the ground. If there is no war in the sky, Russia can't keep fighting on the ground. Zelensky also called out China for its role in the war so far, noting that the Asian nation has significant influence over Russia and could use that to urge Moscow to end its aggression. Without China, Putin's Russia is nothing. Yet too often, China stays silent and distant instead of acting for peace. The Ukrainian president also found time to highlight the support of nations like the US, the UK, and France in providing the strong security guarantees that Ukraine will need once the war comes to an end. That is why today with Britain, with France, and already with more than 30 nations in our coalition of willing, we are building a new security architecture. We count on the United States of America as a backstop. Real security guarantees must become the line Russia cannot cross again. Trump also made several big statements at the event. He once more threatened to impose serious tariffs on Russia unless the war ends. In the event that Russia is not ready to make a deal to end the war, then the United States is fully prepared to impose a very strong round of powerful tariffs. He went on to add that European nations will also need to be involved with those tariffs in order for them to prove most effective, before going on to urge NATO members to halt all Russian oil purchases, adding that the U.S. next sanctions would extend to nations that continue to invest in Russia's resources. This echoes a statement that Trump made earlier in September in which he said, "I'm ready to do major sanctions on Russia when all NATO nations have agreed," and started to do the same thing, and when all NATO nations stop buying oil from Russia. NATO's commitment to win the Ukraine war has been far less than 100%, and the purchase of Russian oil by some has been shocking. It greatly weakens your negotiating position and bargaining power over Russia. I believe that this, plus NATO as a group, placing 50% to 100% tariffs on China, to be fully withdrawn after the war with Russia and Ukraine is ended. At the General Assembly, Trump again mentioned China as well as India, stating that the two nations were funding the war by continuing to buy Russian oil. China and India are the primary funders of the ongoing war by continuing to purchase the Russian oil. He later criticized NATO nations too for still relying on Russian energy, saying, "And Europe has to step it up. They can't be doing what they're doing. They're buying oil and gas from Russia while they're fighting Russia. And it's embarrassing to them, and it was very embarrassing to them when I found out about it, I can tell you that. And that's not all." When asked if he believed NATO nations should shoot down any Russian aircraft that enter their airspace, the US president was unequivocal in his response. "Yes, I do." President Zelensky, understandably, has responded very positively to Trump's new stance and recent statements. He hailed what he saw as a big shift in the US president's viewpoint, and added that he is confident the US will provide Ukraine with vital security guarantees once the war is over. Speaking on Fox News, Zelensky was asked if he was surprised by Trump's shift in stance, responding a little bit, before going on to explain, "I think the fact that Putin was lying to President Trump so many times also made a difference between us." Zelensky also stated that after sharing private talks with Trump, he feels the US president no longer believes that land swaps are the way forward. I think he understands for today that we can't just swap territories. It's not fair. It remains to be seen what will happen next in the war or how Russia might respond to Trump's latest comments. The past has proven that this is an unpredictable and dynamic conflict, with momentum that ebbs and flows back and forth all the time. Yet this still feels like a significant turning point. President Trump has expressed support and solidarity with Ukraine in the past, but it's a whole new step for him to say that Ukraine can take back all its land and to criticize Russia so openly. It's a statement that should fill Kyiv with confidence as its forces battle along the front lines to reclaim taken territory, and one that should leave Russia in major doubt about what to do next. Perhaps, at long last, Putin might finally see the only way out of this hole he dug for himself is through peace. Learn more about why Russia is doomed to fail in our recent video breakdown, looking at all the reasons why Putin was never ever going to get what he wanted out of this invasion. Or, to learn more about how well Ukraine is doing and how bad the situation has become for the Russians, watch our video about Ukrainian forces exploiting Kremlin blind spots with precision drone strikes, weakening the war machine like never before. Make sure to subscribe to our channel too, so you can stay informed and up to date on all the latest news and developments fresh from the front lines of Ukraine.